Mr. Haskins is in charge of hyperbole here at Brookings, but at least one of us in the room appreciated it. Thank you so much. I am very pleased to be here. Ron, thank you again. I'm here at Brookings that does such extraordinary work. I want to thank my good friend Alice Rivlin for being here as well. Bill Frenzel, Congressman Frenzel, and I on opposite sides of the political aisle, but in my view, not on opposite sides of this issue. I think we're really in agreement. Tom Mann, thank you as well for being here, and thank you for the work that you do in helping people understand a body, a Congress that sometimes is very difficult to understand, even from the inside, much less the outside. And thank you all for giving me some of your time this afternoon. Never in my decades in Congress have I seen a public so outraged by deficits and debt. But this moment of historic awareness is also, I think, a moment of historic opportunity. We can waste it on opportunism and slogans and symbolic solutions, or we can dedicate ourselves to the painful, unglamorous, and indispensable work of fiscal discipline. We can choose to hang together, in the words of Ben Franklin, or we'll hang surely separately. I believe and hope and expect that we will hang together. The consequences of failure are dramatic enough to concentrate the mind of even the most dedicated cynic. It is enough to see that by the time my grandchildren and great-granddaughter are in college, our debt will exceed our GDP. We will owe more money than the value of our entire economy. It is enough, I think, to realize that by then our government will exist to do only two things: pay for entitlements and pay interest on our debts, with essentially nothing left over for our nation's defense, for our children's education, for innovative scientific research, or for any of the other critical investments that keep America a home of freedom and opportunity. It is enough to look across the Atlantic at Greece's extreme economic crisis and understand it can happen here, unthinkable as that may have been. If we don't change our course, it will happen here. In their look at 8 centuries of financial crises, economist Carmen Reinhart from the Center of Intellectual Knowledge in the World, the University of Maryland. I'm into hyperbole myself, Ron. Right, and Kenneth Rogoff of Harvard remind us that America is no exception to the law of debt. They point out that economic contractions are often followed by budget crises that dampen prosperity and stall recovery. I quote from their book: "If there's one common theme to the vast range of crises," they write, "it is that excessive debt accumulation often poses greater systemic risk than it seems during a boom. Government debt is the unifying problem, the common symptom of decline." Reinhart and Rogoff add that public debt exceeding 90% of GDP is often a tipping point into these crises, a point we are on pace to reach very soon. It's interesting that Senator Tom Coburn made that same point in an op-ed that he wrote in the Washington Post this past weekend. They went on to say, "This is how empires decline." Historian Neil Ferguson said that. "It begins with a debt explosion. This then is our turning point and our choice. The point at which we join the debt-ridden powers who saw the story of their greatness end in fiscal ruin, or the point at which we as a nation refuse that ending and write a new chapter." It's a waste of time, of course, to hand out blame. There's only one constructive reason to look back at what got us here, and that is to identify the kind of thinking we must avoid. That's why there is such deep harm in the mindset that holds that our budget deficit snapped into existence on January 20th, 2009, because it draws exactly the wrong lessons and would doom us to repeat the same mistakes. As the Nonpartisan Center on Budget and Policy Priorities puts it, and I quote, "Asserting that the deficits that lie ahead are primarily the result of policies enacted since President Obama took office is Orwellian. It stands the truth on its head." The Recovery Act, for instance, has saved or created between 1.5 and 2 million jobs, according to CBO. But it has contributed only fractionally to our deficits. So that, what do the facts say about why we're in this hole? Because, as the center shows, and again I quote, the tax cuts enacted under President Bush, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the economic downturn together explain virtually the entire deficit over the next 10 years. The most important lesson we can draw from the years of recklessness is this. When it comes to budgeting, what is politically easy is often fiscally deadly. It is easier to pay for tax cuts with borrowed money than with lower spending. Easier to hide the true cost of war than to lay those costs before the people. Easier to promise special cost of living adjustments than explain why an increase is not justified under the formula in law. Easier to promise 95% of Americans that we won't consider raising their taxes than to ask all Americans to contribute for the common good. Those kinds of easy choices are so often selfish choices because they leave the chore of cleaning up to someone else. Easy choices may be popular, but the popularity is bought on credit. Washington's behavior will only change with the incentive to change. When voters demand more responsibility and when the political price for easy choices rises sharply. As I said, I'm hopeful that's just what is happening today. The public has a responsibility too, of course, to educate itself about the sources of the deficit and the range of realistic solutions. Not to demand that government continue to escalate entitlement payments and lower the deficit all at the same time. We can't meet this challenge unless the public is ready to confront tough choices and unless leaders in both parties are ready to be honest about those tough choices. When deficit solutions meet resistance, which they will, of course, and when they are painful, which they will be, it is our job to explain why they are also correct and absolutely essential. I believe we do have a president and a Congress that can and will take that responsibility seriously. President Obama and Congress have taken 4 major steps to return our country to fiscal health. First, President Obama proposed a budget that would cut our deficit by more than half by 2013. That is perhaps more conceptual than real at this point in time. It will be real, however, if we show courage in Congress. It also contains a freeze on non-security discretionary spending that will force Congress to rigorously identify priorities within a set framework. It's true that less discretionary spending will barely put a dent in the deficit, however. That focuses, of course, on approximately 14% of the budget that confronts us. As former Republican Senator Alan Simpson explained, and I quote, to say that all we have to do is take care of waste, fraud, and abuse and foreign aid is like a sparrow's belch in the midst of a typhoon. Colorful and correct. But our willingness to curtail the growth of programs we value is powerful evidence that Washington will tighten its belt before asking the public to do the same. Defense spending is exempted from the freeze because we should ensure that our men and women in uniform have the resources necessary to do their job while they're in harm's way. But that does not mean that defense spending should be exempt from cuts where they do not undermine the mission we have set for our military. We must apply the same oversight to defense spending as we do to other discretionary spending. That's why, in another second deficit-cutting step, President Obama signed a bill to reform weapons acquisition, bringing the process more competition and fewer conflicts of interest. A GAO report recently said that the 96 largest weapon systems alone that we've contracted for over the years are responsible for $296 billion in cost overruns. That kind of defense waste only makes America weaker, not stronger in the long run. Third, we continue to work to pass a health insurance reform bill that is not only deficit neutral, but takes on the skyrocketing health care costs that are the single greatest driver of our deficits. Its passage will be a step, though certainly not the final one or only one, toward ensuring the fiscal sustainability of our health care entitlements for decades to come. In fact, according to the Congressional Budget Office, the health care reform bills that passed the House and Senate last year would be fully paid for in the first decade and reduce the deficit by approximately $1 trillion in the second decade. And fourth, we brought back the pay-as-you-go law. President Clinton used PAYGO to help turn deep deficits into a $5.6 trillion projected 10-year surplus. That policy, of course, was adopted in a bipartisan way in 1990 and reaffirmed in a bipartisan way in 1997. It was then, as all of you know, in the early decade of this century, in 2001 and 2002, waived, and then in 2003 not reauthorized. The decision by President Bush and Republican Congress to do away with PAYGO paved the way, I think, for record borrowing and threw us back into the red. Whether it comes to cutting taxes or increasing Medicare benefits, PAYGO is so valuable because it removes from the table the easy and usually unspoken solution. We'd rather our children pay for it. I was proud to sponsor the PAYGO law. Paying for what we buy can't get us out of our hole, but it can stop us from digging it deeper. The PAYGO law did include exemptions for extensions of current policies, but I think that the attention given to those exemptions has obscured the importance of applying real discipline to new policies. For instance, the principle of paying for what we buy applies to the enormous fiscal issue of health insurance reform, restraining spending. The requirement that we include tough choices to offset the cost of expanding access to health insurance has made the task of passing the legislation harder, but it will prevent Congress from creating a massive unfunded liability. By contrast, the Medicare prescription drug program that was enacted after statutory PAYGO lapsed created an unfunded liability of more than $7 trillion. It's also important that we passed a PAYGO law capable of responding to emergencies and recessions. Congress to provide for the extension of unemployment benefits and other safety net programs, which have traditionally been designated as emergency spending during recessions. It seems to me that's appropriate. But we must work to offset the cost of all other parts of our jobs agenda. Cutting the deficit can't strangle job creation, obviously. I have told my friends in the press who meet with me regularly that you can't stimulate and depress at the same time. We need right now to stimulate. But if we stimulate now without a thought of tomorrow's discipline that is essential, we will not serve either now or the future well. All of these steps are essential, but they're not enough to return our budget to balance. President Obama is creating a bipartisan fiscal commission of which Ron spoke. Along with Speaker Pelosi and Majority Leader Reid, I pledge that its recommendations will get an up or down vote in Congress. A statutory provision, which was unable to be passed, would have assured that. But Senator Reid, Speaker Pelosi, and I have all given such assurance. Given the seriousness of our situation, the Commission must come to a consensus, and Congress must act on its proposals at the end of the year. The President has appointed two proven budget balancers to chair the Commission, former Clinton White House Chief of Staff Erskine Bowles and former Senator Alan Simpson. Not only do they understand budget, but they understand politics, and we need both understandings to be successful. I hope congressional Republicans will take the work as sincerely and seriously as the chairman take it. I hope my own colleagues will do so as well, that they will come to the table without preconditions, ready to contribute their ideas and not just their criticism from the sideline. The Commission has a bipartisan pedigree, and it won the votes of 16 Republicans in the Senate. I was, of course, disappointed to see that 7 Republican supporters of the Commission bill, including the minority leader, decided they were against it as soon as President Obama endorsed it. President Reagan and Speaker O'Neill worked on Social Security reform in the 80s, as all of you know. And the Republican reaction to the Medicare changes in the health care bill both teach the same lesson. The real work of cutting deficits is so easy to demagogue that it rarely succeeds, and in this instance will not succeed, in my opinion, unless we have support from both sides of the aisle. That's one of the reasons why the Fiscal Commission must not take any option off the table, from raising revenues to cutting entitlement spending. And that's why both parties have a duty to appoint members who are willing to compromise and as well make tough decisions. It's also clear to me that the Commission takes if it takes a one-handed approach, it will fail, both politically and substantively. I want to say a word about Congressman Ryan's thoughtful budget proposal. I think that proposal shows what an approach looks like when it relies entirely on cutting spending. He should, however, be commended, and I've commended him, for putting together a serious and detailed plan to tackle the deficit. It doesn't raise a single tax, but as a consequence, it significantly changes Medicare. We can argue about that, but what we ought not to argue about is that somebody has put on the table a very serious and politically risky proposal. That strikes me in terms of cutting Medicare very deeply to accomplish the objective without any thought of additional revenues from any source. It strikes me as I think it would strike most Americans as very much the wrong solution. But Congressman Ryan deserves, for being one of the few members of his party, or either party, to tell the public exactly what he'd cut. That's far better, in my view, than pretending that the solution to higher deficits is simply lower taxes and wishful thinking. In fact, as much as his party's leadership tries to distance itself from his plan, Paul Ryan's program, or something very much like it, is the logical outcome of the other party's rhetoric of cutting taxes and deficits at the same time. It seems to me that the only solution that can win the support of both parties is a balanced approach, one that cuts some spending and raises some revenue while avoiding extremes in either direction. A balanced approach would spread the effects of change across America's society, rather than concentrating them simply on seniors. Now, what are our options on a budget agreement? On the side of entitlement spending, an agreement might recognize that Americans are living longer lives and raise the retirement age over a period of years, as we did in '83, or even peg the retirement age to lifespan. Another option is to make Social Security and Medicare benefits more progressive, while strengthening the safety net for low-income Americans. That could preserve those programs as a central part of our social compact, while protecting, at the same time, their ability to help those in the greatest need. On the side of revenues, President Obama was correct, in my view, in refusing to take any options off the Commission's table. No one likes raising revenue, and understandably so. But if you're going to buy, you need to pay. In 1993, President Clinton proposed an economic plan aimed at accomplishing fiscal balance, and he paved the way for the greatest American prosperity in a generation. The bipartisan tax compromise in 1986 also showed the importance of a simplified, more efficient tax code. I'm hopeful that both parties will agree to look at revenues as part of the solution, not as a gateway to higher spending, but as a part of a compromise that cuts spending and balances the budget. None of this, of course, as all of you in this room know, to put it mildly, is easy. It will take bipartisan trust. There's not much of that in supply nowadays. Presidential leadership, I think there's a lot of that in supply. And a public spirit that many assume is beyond America's reach in the year 2010. But I do not share that cynicism, because America has made a career of proving such cynicism wrong. As Jim Fallow recently wrote in The Atlantic, and I quote, "During just the time when Frederick Law Olmsted designed Central Park, when Theodore Roosevelt set aside land for national parks, when Dwight Eisenhower created the Pentagon Research Agency that ultimately gave rise to the Internet, the American system seemed broken too. Saving America from debt would belong next to those accomplishments, because in every era, these very fiscal issues are among the greatest tests a nation can face. We're not the first great power to meet the challenges from within. We would not be the first to fail. Spain under the Habsburgs, France under Louis XVI, the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century, the British Empire in the 20th. All of them were crippled by borrowing, by interest payments, and by debt. We, of course, are not exempt. In every era, these fiscal issues are questions of national security and national success. And in a democracy, they are questions as well of national character. They are not technical puzzles for a few of us in seminars, think tanks, and back rooms. They are a challenge for all of us. In field hearings of the Commission, on the radio, and online, and in family rooms, our willingness to face reality will be a measure of our character. Our willingness to reject easy answers from our leaders is a measure of that character. Our willingness to put the welfare of our children ahead of our own, to plant seeds for them whose fruit we may never taste, is a powerful test of our character. More than wealth, more than might, those are the virtues that have made America flourish. Those are the virtues we need to meet that test. So I can say with confidence, if we are unable to raise our heads, even for a moment, above the daily partisan fight, if the collapse comes, we will deserve it. But if we regain a measure of our lost trust and support one another through shared sacrifice and return our country to fiscal health and strength, we will deserve that as well. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm taking questions, I'm told. Yes.